Amazing. Welcome everyone to the call. This is the Generation Green December webinar series. We'll just get going in a minute or two as you let people join into the call. Awesome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Generation Green December webinar series. I'm just going to give it another 1 or 2 minutes and then we'll get started. Amazing. I can see more people come in. Welcome to the Generation Green December webinar series. Yeah, we're just waiting just a couple, maybe 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we're going to get started. We're going to talk about it. Hani will mention it, but yeah, this is a Zoom webinar, so you don't have to worry about your video or your audio being turned on. You can see all of us panelists up here. So yeah, you can just join in, sit back and relax, and we'll get started really soon. Amazing. Cool. I think as more people join in, they'll catch the drift here. Yeah, if you have any questions, you feel free to raise your hand and or use the chat. You can chat us as a panelist or host as well. And why don't we get started and let people join in as we go. So I will mute myself now and I invite Hania to take it away.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Generation Green's December webinar series, all about active transportation. My name is Hania, and I am a Generation Green youth stakeholder. These webinars are all about the why behind a theme, exploring how active transportation affects different areas of our lives. This is a Zoom webinar, so your video or microphone will be off during the presentations. Feel free to interact via the chat and ask questions using the Q&A. You can use the chat on the right and the Q&A function down below. If you want to join us on stage after the presentation for a more informal discussion and to join the conversation, raise your hand, which is located next to the Q&A button, and we can bring you with us to ask your question. First, I would like to do the land acknowledgement. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis. From the Anishinaabe to the Attawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis. These lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the 4 directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walk before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. What is Generation Green? Generation Green aims to work authentically with young people, driving their actions and designing a program for them that will activate change and create solutions to empower them to take actions. Now I'll pass it over to Claire to talk a bit more about our theme and introduce our speakers for tonight.
Thanks, Hania. Transportation is one of the leading contributors of greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution in Halton and around the world. Reducing the burning of fossil fuels for transport will help reduce the rate of climate change and the severity of the impacts of climate change. That's where you come in. We want to transform our cities to be walkable, safe, accessible, and sustainable for everybody. It is my pleasure to introduce Suzanne and Fred to the call. Suzanne is the Environmental Sustainability Specialist for the Halton District School Board. Fred is the General Manager of Planning at the Halton District School Board. Thank you so much to Suzanne and Fred for joining us today.
Amazing. I invite Suzanne and Fred. You can share your screen now and we can get going with the presentation.
Perfect, thank you. Just want to confirm that everyone can see the screen. Perfect, all right. Well, Suzanne, I'll hand it off to you to start us off and then get right to it.
Okay. So if you can advance the slide there. We have a brief agenda because we're a school board and we like to do things that way. We're going to introduce ourselves a little bit more, do an icebreaker activity, talk about the strategic vision that the boards have, how AT, active transportation, is being implemented in Halton, and then leave it open to questions for you. Next slide. There we go. So a little bit about me, because it always helps to know a little bit about how people got where they've, sort of ended up. I'm the environmental sustainability specialist for the Halton District School Board. I have a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from McMaster University. I've worked for multinational consulting firms. I've been self-employed. I've written scientific papers, technical writer. I've worked for a not-for-profit, and now I work for the Halton District School Board. And one of the things that I do at the Halton District School Board is the development and implementation of policies around practices that impact the board's environmental footprint or their sustainability footprint. And that comes in many forms. It could be eco schools. Some of you might be familiar with that. I also look at energy and water conservation. I also work with schools and the board, many aspects of the board, so including IT and procurement, about waste minimization and around waste diversion, which are two separate things. I'm involved with school ground greening, which means I get to talk about how we learn outside, but also site design. And I'm also involved with active transportation. And, I thought, that's my work thing. So I really love to scuba dive. And one of my favorite things, most amazing things I've ever done is go swimming with sea turtles. So that's a little bit about me. I'll let Fred introduce himself.
Thanks, Suzanne. So my name's Fred Thibeault. I'm the General Manager of Planning at the Halton District School Board. So in terms of my educational background, so you know where I'm coming from, I have a Bachelor's of Environmental Studies and an Honors in Planning from the University of Waterloo. So studied planning as my major at the university, and also managed to get a specialization in land development and urban design, two things that I was very interested in when I was doing my undergrad. Later on in life, I decided, why not? Let's do a master's. So I went and completed my master's at the University of Ryerson. I got my urban development master's. And in terms of my previous work experience, while I was at the University of Waterloo, I did do quite a few co-ops, whether municipalities or private sector, but I'd say my more long-standing work experience has always been with school board. So at a young age, even in high school, I was doing site surveys and measuring school sites across Ontario when I was working for the French Public School Board, which ranged from Penetanguishene to the east all the way down to Windsor. So pretty big geography, got to see a lot of Southern Ontario. And then, that gave me the knack for getting into planning and a little bit more facilities and architecture. So that led me to my academic career. And then after my master's program, I worked at the Halton Catholic District School Board, very similar position as I now have at the Halton District School Board. In terms of what I do, more specifically, that's tied to what we're discussing tonight. One of the big things I do is the acquisition and preparation of school sites for the board. So we're in a very high growth area in the Halton region. So we're on a constant basis buying new sites and developing new schools and trying to coordinate with our municipal agencies to get those sites ready through site plans and through school site designs and architects, just to figure out how our school is going to function, not only as a building, but also as a site. And over time, improving those as we're learning more and more how our target audience, students, parents, guardians, as well as the wider community are using our sites. Another thing that I do that's related to this is coordinating with the Halton Student Transportation Services, HSTS. That's the third party entity that provides transportation for both school boards in the Halton region. And we're working with them to define, what is a walkable area, what's some exception areas, because we have to cross these major barriers, and determining eligibility factors for existing and new communities. So with that, as Suzanne has pointed out, we're going to start off with a little bit of an icebreaker here, get you guys warmed up for the conversation that's to come. So we'll be using Menti for tonight. So what I'd ask you to do is, if you have any device, whether it's the laptop here or the portable device or phone that you have, you can just go to menti.com and a screen will pop up similar to the one on the bottom right-hand side of the slide here. And then there you could input the code that's listed here, 89453178. And I will switch screens to our Menti slides. Suzanne, can you see the Menti slides?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. All
That's
right.
great. And I see that everyone is joining in here. Awesome.
Yeah, got 6 participants of the 18.
So,
All right, let's jump in there and we'll see as the
okay.
there we go.
So because we're here to talk about active transportation, I thought, we'd start right where things are going. So how did you get to go to school today? We tried to come up with as many options, and this was to really look at, recognize that people get to school and get around in different ways. So hopefully we covered the way that that you got to school.
Just going to leave it open for a little longer. I see we've got about 21 attendees, 13 responses so far. Let's give everyone a little bit of time to log in. We'll be doing a number of these throughout the presentation, so it's good for you to join.
Okay. So we did include skateboarding and cycling, and I know skateboarding might be a bit of an issue in the winter because the wheels are pretty small, but a lot of Scandinavian countries, people cycle all year round, and a lot of people do as well. So we didn't know what the weather would be like, so we thought we'd include more than one option. So what we're looking at is the largest proportion is a personal vehicle. We have lots of people who took the school bus or public transit, and we have a few people who walked and a few people who are attending school virtually. So we wanted to make sure we covered everyone. So that's pretty good. Fred, if you can go to the next one, please. So how long does it take you to get to school? And I'm kind of thinking, door to door. Does it take you instantaneous because you're logging in virtually? Is it 5 to 10 minutes or 0 to 10, 20 to 30, more than 30 minutes? But it's looking like most people are somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes. So that's great. A few people live a little farther away and a few people live a little closer. So that's a good idea of the amount of time that people spend. So our biggest proportion is 10 to 20 minutes. So keeping those in mind as we go forward. This is where we're looking for you to think about, what does your experience like getting to school? And that can be, sort of the feelings that you have, the conditions that you encounter just on a regular basis. So some of the words that come to mind when you think about the trip to or from school. So yeah, traffic certainly is one of them. We've got rushed, it's boring. I forgot my homework. Maybe I didn't do my homework, or I do have my homework. So I'm going to say here, overall, these words are not really positive words as we go through here. Rush, fast, busy. I'm not seeing too many people. Oh, I've got one person saying refreshing and somebody saying convenient. But most of the words, and the biggest words in the middle, are cold, tired, siblings. And I think that's where I always find these wordles to be really important, because we get the really common words that people put in, But then we start getting the smaller words on the outside. And I think that's where, we start looking to see why do people have different ideas? Why does one person find it refreshing and somebody else find it exhausting? One person says it's boring and somebody else says it's chaos. So it's interesting when we start looking at those words, how we're doing. So I think, Fred, if we go back to the slide presentation now, we've got a good idea here, and keep all these in mind as we go back. So we're going to sort of talk about, all the pieces that the board considers when they're looking at active transportation. Next slide, please. So whether or not you have seen this, the board has a 4-year multi-year plan. It started last year, it goes to 2024. And we're really lucky in our board because one of the areas of focus is environmental leadership, and it's take action for a sustainable world. And you'll notice that all of these areas of focus are linked. They sort of flow from one to the next. And that's because they really are all linked. Equity inclusion is tied to mental health and well-being, which is tied to learning and achievement, which is tied to environmental leadership, which is tied to Indigenous perspectives. And you can move those around and connect them anywhere you want. So taking a little bit of a closer look at the environmental leadership area of focus, we're looking about what the board would like to do. And this multi-year plan was passed by the Board of Trustees, is they want to deepen our opportunities to develop connections and learn about those connections. Climate change is a human rights issue because it's of its effects on people. We want to elevate local environmental practices, and we want to have learning environments that support the goals of sustainable development. Next slide, Fred. 2 years ago now, the board passed a student-led climate emergency declaration. And this was really important for us as a board. Shows that the Board of Trustees is listening to what students feel is important. But it was also really cool because it was the first one we could find, and we looked. So they were expressing their concern about the state of the environment. And they're saying, the board has a responsibility to take some action. Next slide, Fred. So what they were asking was that, the board listen to students, they empower students to take action, they communicate to students what's happening within the board, include student voice, and recognize that students are leading the way in many ways. So this is where this really ties into, the Gen Green, and Gen Green is tied to our multi-year plan and our climate declaration. Next slide, Fred. But it's okay to be tied locally, but we really need to be tied to bigger goals to know that we're contributing to things that are bigger than ourselves as well. So this is where the UN Sustainable Development Goals come into play. And we start looking at how the actions the board is taking and supporting are tied to bigger goals that affect all of us around the world. And we all know that climate change is not a local issue. It might have local impacts, but it's not a local issue. And we all have to work together to address it. Next slide. So what do facilities? I work for facilities. Fred works for planning. We both work for the same people. It's all very similar. What's our vision? Why do we believe active transportation is so important at our schools? Well, the first thing that we think is that safety. And someone asked me, what's the most important thing at schools? Well, safety. Safety of students, safety of staff, safety of the community in and around our sites. And you can tie that to good health and well-being. We need active transportation supports mental health and well-being, physical health and well-being. We go back to those comments that you made. How does the trip to school make you feel? Well, it makes me feel frustrated and angry and disappointed, uptight. And I had a conversation with some students earlier this week, and that's what they said. And I laughed because one of them said, well, sometimes I hear bad words. They were elementary students that I was talking to. And I thought, well, who's saying those? We focus on greener sites that are less parking orientated. We talk about schools being a community hub. equitable access. And this equitable access is not just for students in the morning getting to school, but also for the communities during all the whole day. Go ahead, Fred.
All right, so this is where I take it off, and these are all the high level ideas, both at a local, regional, and then worldwide, and looking at how we're implementing this kind of change. And when it's coming down to the local level, a lot of these things are giving us good direction as to where to go. But the next part is, how do you coordinate and how do you navigate this within your local municipalities, and how do you actually start pushing ahead with this kind of change so you can see it on the ground? So really one of the big questions we're asking ourselves is, like, how do we solve this problem? And a lot of times you look at these issues, and they're what I refer to as something I learned in university. It's called a wicked problem, where there could be a lot of simple solutions to this problem, but sometimes those solutions just lead to other problems in themselves, and it just perpetuates and perpetuates. So a lot of times when we're trying to navigate through this and trying to find a solution to how do we have more people walk to school, bike to school, roll to school, it's not always as straightforward as you'd think, as saying just walk to school, take the bus. So there are some barriers. There's some things that prevent people from doing so, whether it's a physical barrier or sometimes it's a perception. That's what we want to get into tonight. So here's a good example of something where somebody took a problem, which was a school site that was in the United States. It was a rural property. Not many people could walk to school because of the rural nature. As you can see on the slide here, there's no sidewalks getting to school. So they figured, you know what, how about we just, and at the end of all this, once they completed the pilot, they've noticed, well, we have to try something new. So there's got to be another solution. So when we're looking at designing our school sites, and when we're looking at trying to bring about this change in behavior, which is encouraging more active transportation, the one thing that we really want to look at is that there's multiple modes. So really, what would make me happy, at least as a planner, is it's not just a matter of taking one mode of transportation to get to and from to school, home to school travel. It can be multiple approaches. So you can take all of these different modes of transport to get to school, and you can change the overall impact you have, whether you walk entirely to school or you take the bus and you walk to your bus stop, you take the bus to school, and then you walk the rest of the way. Or even if your parents are going to drive you, or if you're driving to school yourself, there's the option maybe parking further away or dropping off further away, and trying to mix up your ride share so that some of that is not all impacted on or you're not creating as much of an impact. So really, we look at it at all fronts. Whatever the mode is, every meter counts, as long as it's a more sustainable way of doing so. So when we're trying to implement this change, at least as a board, really there's a lot of people that are involved, a lot of departments, a lot of agencies. So when we're looking at it internally as the board, as Suzanne has mentioned, planning and facilities work close together in doing some of this, but we're also working with our school administrators to find out exactly what their school specific issues are. And we're also trying to tie that in the overall curriculum so that we're educating on this piece too, and demonstrating what some of the benefits are in doing active transportation, because it's not always about building it. Sometimes you have to educate onto why it's a good thing. And the other thing we also work with is our Halton Student Transportation Consortium, which is dealing with the whole transportation side of things and defining these bus boundaries, so that, again, going back to the multimodal active transportation initiative, it's really, we have busing, we have walking, and how do we all coordinate together to do this? Suzanne?
But I just jump in there for a second. When we talk about school curriculum, it's important to know that, you still need skills. You need to, just as you need to learn to drive a car, you need to learn the rules of the road and how to navigate them. And part of that is, riding bikes and being a safe pedestrian, because, the saying goes back, road safety is all of our responsibilities. So it's incorporating those skills into learning that goes on within the school as well.
Thanks for that, Suzanne. And this learning too happens with our municipal agencies too. So, as we're progressing, as I was saying, we're constantly building new sites, but also retrofitting existing sites and changing the way we're doing things, because we're learning as we're going what's working, what's not working. So whenever we're trying to implement some of these changes, we're working with our municipalities, the region. We're working with some of the conservation authorities too on schools that may be sited close to their area or their jurisdiction. Or even trying to, further supports more sustainable modes of transportation. And we're also working with the province to bring in some of these overall initiatives down to the local level. And at the end of the day, it's really, once you've built it, you've designed it, and you've figured out what this new school design or this new site design is going to be. Ultimately, we're also having to work with our end users, which are the parents, the guardians, the students, and the staff. And that's a key piece to gauge, how did we do in our overall designs? Where can we learn, and where can we tie it all back when we start it all over again to do better and to continuously improve? So just generally speaking, I don't want to go into too much details, but when we're doing the site selection process and when we're trying to define what our schools look like and how they function overall in a wider community, we look at a number of different criteria. So a good example right now is in Milton, for some of you that are local from there, or even in Oakville. They're what's called a secondary plan. So what it is before, when the planning process starts, is probably just a lot of farm fields. And what the municipalities as well as the region do is they define a growth area as a region. They say this is how much population you need, and then the municipality goes in and they say, if this is how much population we need, these are how many houses we need, the types of housing, the density we need, and here's the community infrastructure: schools, libraries, parks, churches, places of worship, things like that. And then they look at it and see, okay, well, how do we balance all of these land needs and then create a plan, which is what's shown on this slide below here. And you also look at the road networks, the connectivity, how do people get places in this new community, both driving and to a lesser degree sometimes walking. So when we're looking at it on a school site basis, a lot of the components we're looking at is, where are our schools sited? Are they on a very busy road? Does that work for an elementary school, or is it better for a secondary school? We're looking at how big our sites are, and this also plays into being sustainable and being efficient, where we're not wanting to build up all our land. We want to have a more dense environment so that we're not eating up all of our farmland in our greenfield areas. So we're tackling that as trying to fit more on a site and being more efficient while still providing adequate open space. Looking at who our neighbors are, whether it's just a residential neighborhood, or can we be with another park that we can have some shared uses, whether it's play or parking or offsetting some of those needs that we need to have on our site, and vice versa. We're wanting to look as to how central is that school to the community it's going to be serving. We don't want to have it tucked into a corner where everybody's so far away that they're going to have to drive or take the bus. Like, can we make it more central so everybody can access the school, not just for the school day, but also as a community hub, as a space for play and congregation. And then we're looking at where do we fall within the pathway system, transit corridors, and where is some of that sharing available with our other municipal partner infrastructures as well. So these are the criteria we're looking at overall. And then as you hone in closer, then you start looking at the neighborhood scale, which really you're looking at more local roads. Where are the sidewalks? Where are the connections? Where are the pathways into the park? And really what we're doing when we're reviewing the neighborhood design is, what's that connectivity to the school? Is there a good enough network where whoever's walking or driving or biking or whatever mode it is can access the school using a variety of different ways? So the image that's shown on the right here is what we call a walking web, which is essentially saying if you start at one point and you drew a line that's a certain distance, for us, it'd be 1.6 kilometers for an elementary school. What's that area of people that fall within it? And what we're trying to do is maximize the number of people that fall within that walk distance, because that means that the school is centrally placed and it's accessible. So we're trying to avoid having these street patterns or networks that preclude that kind of connectivity, and make it more difficult for people to get to and from a specific location, namely a school. And as part of this too, we're trying to encourage that multimodal use of transportation. So trying to find ways where you don't have to invite all of the cars to the site, not build all the parking on the site to accommodate more people driving to school. You're trying to find ways of creating pathways, drop-off areas, and things of that nature, so you can keep traffic off the school and have the school focus on what it's most important, the student and its use and their use of it. And then you finally come into the school site scale, where now we're just looking at our property on itself, with a little bit of consideration of what's happening on the peripheries. So, I was mentioning earlier how we've shifted our focus on how we design schools. Well, before we were looking at, a very generic building where we'd have, or a very nice building where we'd have it on the front of the street. And then we'd have parking for cars. We'd have kiss and rides for parents to drop off their kids. And then we would have a play field, just a soccer field. Now we're trying to look at alternatives like removing some of those kiss and rides on site, putting them off site, reducing on site circulation so that the people that are on site are the people that are working there at that time. So your teachers and the school administration and the support staff. We're looking at, instead of just building a field, well, can we have varying topographies so it's more of a site that you can explore and have different areas to congregate, learn with outdoor classrooms, or having some more shaded areas and more trees on the site and not just on the edges of the site. So these are the things that we're looking at as we're designing our sites, of like, how can we make them a more inviting place, but also a more interactive place, and that's a safe place to travel to when you're walking to school, or alternate modes of transportation. And some of the other things we're looking at too is the infrastructure within that community to support this kind of behavior, to have more people, walk to school, bike to school, roll to school. So in the community, it's, the provision of sidewalks, crosswalks at intersections, safe crosswalks, crossing guards sometimes is needed too. Having the necessary bike routes that's connecting all of these components to the community. And then we're looking at things on site. So, there's one thing about getting to school, but what do you do with your mode of transportation after you get there? Shoes are easy, just walk in with them. But if you have a skateboard, a longboard, a bike, where are you storing that? Do you have the room to store it? And also, when we're inviting traffic on site, it also makes it more difficult for you to navigate on site once you get there. So trying to remove that traffic off of the site and pushing it onto the street are some of the new initiatives we're looking at, and trying to support more green space. Because really, at the end of the day, when we have traffic on site, it's for peak time. It's about half an hour a day in total. So how do we make it so that you have more space to play for the rest of the day? Not just the school day, but the weekends or after school. And the last piece of infrastructure that I find really important too is providing information and data. So that's something to empower those that are using these modes, or are curious or want to change or need to be educated on how to change. Is how do you show somebody that this is a safe and sustainable way to get to school? And a lot of that can be done with educational resources, mapping, which we'll look at in a few. And going back to what Suzanne said too, is the curriculum on how to educate and make sure that everyone's well informed on how to safely get to places. So with that, we'll move on to our next set of Menti questions. So I'm just going to change my screen here. Here we go. So I'll pass it over to Suzanne.
Thanks, Fred. Fred is a wealth of knowledge. If you ever want to know anything about site selection, all that, he's got it all there at his fingertips. So the question this time is, why do you think active modes of transportation are important? And if you close the Menti, you go back to menti.com and use the code 8945-3178. So why do you think that we should be looking at using active modes of transportation? Absolutely, the environment, the impact. We heard from at the beginning that our personal transportation has a huge impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So we're starting now, if we go back to, compared to the slide where we talked about the experience, now we're talking about why do we think it's important? And they're much more positive, sustainable, safe, accessible, environmental reasons. Carbon reduction. Exercise, so physical health, comfort. So much more positive words that we're looking at now. So I think that's, give it a second. And then we'll go to the next question, which is, what are the benefits of active transportation? I think this is kind of the same as the previous one. Maybe we'll skip over this one, Fred, and go to the next one and say, what's stopping you from, oh, we have lots of people, we have some people popping some things in there. So again, you know, the physical, environmental, and the environment. So what the question now is, what's stopping you from walking and rolling to school or taking the school bus for using active transportation? We have a lot of, you know, distance too far, where you're located, the weather. We're Canadians, we love to talk about the weather. And we know there's a difference between weather and climate, but certainly, again, now we're getting more into some of those negative words that we had talked about. I don't want to say negative, but some of the, you know, the words about being tired, COVID. I think we all just want COVID just to go away. You know, lack of sleep, accessibility, access, location. So those are kind of the answers that we're coming up with. So the weather is the weather. I grew up in Ottawa, and they made you walk. I don't know. I don't think we had any better clothing. We just were used to it. But you know, I get the same thing when it's too warm. It's too warm to walk. It's too cold to walk. But let's go back to the slideshow, Fred.
Suzanne, bear with me. I was going to ask maybe a little additional question here. It's don't close it yet, guys. I'll just add a new slide here. I'd be curious to know. Do you know if you're eligible for transportation? Get a sense here. Can everyone see that? Or Suzanne, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
All
So
right,
the question is, are you eligible for transportation? And by that mean, you know, do you live in 1.6 kilometers of an elementary school or 3.2 kilometers of a secondary school? And those distances, while they are set by the board, are pretty standard across the province. Interesting.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. No, not being sure of it too, because you might very well be eligible. So that could be another alternative form of. Oh.
Yeah. So we'll try to quickly go back to the slideshow and just do a couple quick comments at the end there, and then we'll turn it over. So a lot of what we do is tackling perceptions, you know, the early kiss and rides. People are like, it's safer, it's too far. You know, my mom wants to drive me, or my dad wants to drive me. Is sometimes, you know, it can be difficult. It can be difficult. And, you know, a lot of it is safety. We go back to that. Our safety is our number one concern, which doesn't always translate to what other people think safety is, because we see what happens at the site and people who drive see what happens in their car. So we do that. When we go on, go ahead, Fred. So when we look at the distance piece, we talked when we first started working together, and we were talking about, do we talk about distance or do we talk about time? So we created these maps. These maps are available on Every Meter Counts. They're for every school in both Halton public Halton District and Halton Catholic. You pick your school and it shows you this map, which shows you, 5-minute walking distance, and you can blow them up so you can find your home, your 10-minute, 15-minute, 30-minute. So when we start looking at this, we can see, there are other schools within the area. This is our walking times. And if we go to the next one, this is our biking time. Now, all of a sudden you can start seeing within 15 minutes, you can get pretty far from using that center point. And these are done, but using roads. That's why the edges are kind of funny. So all of a sudden, using active transportation, you have an enormous increase in the amount of distance that you can, the spaces that you can access. Go ahead. So how to invoke change? Well, the board is here to support and to help with the behind the scenes things, but students will end up being the animators of the change. And it comes down to the question, why can't I walk to school? Well, there's too much traffic, which is it's kind of the piece around, chicken and the egg. How do we get people to walk? It'll be safer. So if I think, Fred, the next slide. So how do we solve this problem? I'd like to say that there's one solution and it's a straight line and we're going to get to success, and active transportation will be the preferred mode of choice for everybody. The reality is it's never a straight line. There's lots of ups, there's downs, there's backs, there's forwards, and there's many options there. So I think we're at the point where we would be happy to take questions.
Great. So thank you so much to Suzanne and Fred for joining us today. Now, if anyone has any questions from the audience, you can type it in chat or raise your hand. I'm just going to ask a quick question to start things off. How can students engage with school boards, principals, or teachers on active transportation?
So I'll jump in here. How can students engage? Well, one of the ways that when we look at active transportation is understanding sort of travel patterns and how the site's used. So if you feel that, there's some infrastructure or some change that needs to be made in or around your school, and this is where Fred talked about, bike racks and scooter racks and longboard racks, those kind of things, then you can reach out to your school principal would be a good person to sort of ask those questions because they know where those resources are. Halton's really lucky we have bike racks at every school, but maybe we don't have enough. Maybe that's something that we need to do. Another place is to connect with other students and then have that conversation at student parliament, or perhaps, a presentation to school councils. Hope that answers that question.
Maybe a couple other things too, just even to answer the question about whether or not you're eligible for school transportation. That one you could go to haltonbus.ca if you're curious as to whether or not you are eligible, and you can just input your address and then find out if you could take the bus and if you're part of that eligibility factor. Another thing too to consider is, if you're looking at doing some small incremental changes over time to kind of, we saw distance as being one of the main barriers or obstacles in walking or being taking active mode of transportation to school. Even something as simple as walking a block, being dropped off a little bit further away from school, so you're avoiding that on-site traffic and dispersing it. That could be another alternative or strategy. And talking about with your parents and figuring out if there's other ways you can get to and from school.
Amazing. I think we have another, this is Katie. We have another question just in the Q&A here. It says, if you are a student who's interested in taking active transportation, but your parents might not let you, what can you do?
So that's there's lots of things like you need to understand perhaps why your parents are concerned about you using active transportation. And it might be that, you know, they don't, that you work with your parents to identify the route that you're going to take to school, that you identify the pieces where there's concern about, you know, talking about where the crossing guards are, where there's lights to cross a road, or even, you know, developing a plan with a friend to say, you know what, a group of us are going to walk to school together, and talking to all your parents at the same time and explaining why you feel that this is a good way for you to use active transportation, but also to understand where your parents are coming from, because your parents are looking at this from the perspective of, you know, safety. And you want to demonstrate to them that you've understood and heard what they have to say about safety and understanding where you're going. And perhaps that's a starting point to have that conversation.
Amazing. Thanks, Suzanne. I am also going to ask, there was a student that wanted to ask her question, and you are now able to unmute. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So the thing is, my question is, for all three of these webinars, are they just presentations, or has the Gen Green project already been explained?
Yeah, I can answer that question. All of these presentations, all these webinars are presentations, and I will explain the project at the last sort of 5 minutes at the end. The project is open. You can start putting in your idea right now, but I'll speak a little bit to that just at the end. These are all about taking the opportunity to figure out what is going on in our community. So Suzanne and Fred, yeah, if you're wondering about what is going on in my own schools, we're so lucky to have them with us to talk a little bit about it. So if you're thinking of a project where you bike or walk to school, or there's barriers for you, or you might want to see more, as Suzanne mentioned, more bike racks at your school, or what is it, what do other students do? Maybe you do a survey. Yeah, ask Suzanne and Fred for some ideas. This is all about getting inspired to take action. But I will talk a little bit more about the project really soon too.
Okay, so are you going to talk about it like at the end of this presentation, or maybe in the next presentation?
The end of this one. Yeah, it's coming.
Okay.
Soon, I promise.
Okay, I was asking because unfortunately I missed the first webinar because I had no idea that it was occurring anyway.
Yeah.
So that's why I was asking, in case I missed it, all of it.
No worries. Yeah, I'm doing it at the end of each, so that way anybody who came in to one or two or all three, they get a nice refresher and they can learn too.
Okay, and my second question is, so I received like a reminder email for this, and it says that I can also possibly get volunteer hours for listening to these presentations as well. So is that true?
That is true. That's right. Yeah, these are part of Gen Green process. So yeah, by attending these webinars, you are entitled to volunteer hours. And I'll talk a little bit more about the project and some of the, because you can also get volunteer hours for participating in Gen Green too. But I'll talk about that a little bit as well.
Okay, so sorry if I'm asking too many questions.
No worries.
All right then. So like, will I automatically get the volunteer hours, or do I have to send like an email stating that I got this amount of volunteer hours and stuff like that? Because like I've never really done this before, so I don't really know what to do.
No worries. Great questions.
Thank you.
I've taken attendance at these webinars, as well as made notes of who's attended the webinar last week as well. And yeah, I'll be giving out those volunteer hours to you. So yeah, that applies to everybody on the call too. I know that you've taken time to be here. I appreciate that. And same with Suzanne and Fred, who've taken the time to speak to us as well. So I want to recognize your time as well through those community involvement hours too. So I will be sending a letter at the end of the third one. We have one more webinar coming up next week, which again, I'll speak to a little bit like right at the end of, right, like the last, this call will go until about 6:45. So about 6:45 minutes or so, I'll run through the entire project and what you need to know.
Okay, all right then. Thank you so much.
No worries. Cool. I think, Claire, we have like another question to ask Suzanne and Fred as well, if there's not too many Q&As in our chat and our there. So why don't you go ahead and ask Suzanne or Fred one of our questions?
Great. I wanted to ask a question about what's it like working in transportation, planning for a school board like HTSB? Are there any upcoming projects that you are excited about that you can share with us today?
Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button. Something that we're pretty excited about right now that we're working on is we've got a new school in Milton, yet to be named, but it's called Milton 12 for the time being. And that's a school site where it was the site plan we showed earlier and a few slides up. I'll just pull it up here. It doesn't seem like much on plan because it's just a line drawing, but this is one where we've started taking these multiple approaches to how we're changing the way our sites function. So one of the main features that we're really excited about here is that we've incorporated an on-street lay-by. So instead of having bus traffic enter the site or even parent traffic enter the site, they're going to stay on the roadway. So that way we're reducing those moments of interaction between cars and pedestrians or cyclists or rollers or what have you on site, and you're keeping it on the roadway. So that way we've minimized that. So that's a new pilot project that's being undertaken at 3 different schools in Milton right now. And we're looking to adapt that model to our other future schools that are planned. We were successful in removing a kiss and ride of the 2 that we usually plan. So that's another, incremental change where we're moving in the direction that we want to. And I think most exciting of all, which is actually on the school site, is we're really implementing this alternative outdoor space, which Suzanne is more involved with at other school sites. But instead of just doing a standard blacktop or a standard paved surface for play, you have like a soccer field. We're doing this varying topography, so you're going to have hillsides, outdoor classrooms, a lot more treat areas internal to the site, and areas to congregate. So we're pretty excited about this new model and how that might change the way that we look at the future design of our school sites.
I'm just going to jump in here and say that I'm really excited that Jen Green is looking at active transportation this year. I think that, as we explained on that slide that talked about, shortest distance between 2 points being a straight line, and the reality is not. I think I'm really looking forward to hearing the ideas and understanding where you see that the barriers can be overcome, or addressing barriers or obstacles to active transportation at your school, or even perhaps at a school that you went to previously. If you're a secondary school student and you attended an elementary school, what are the barriers to active transportation at elementary schools? So, there's lots of great stuff about site selection and all that we're moving forward on. It's very exciting making a community, the school being part of the community as a walkable community, but I'm really excited about this project too. So I look forward to hearing from students.
Amazing. And on that note, I will move and to talk a little bit about the project that there's been some questions about. So I'm just going to pull share screen from you, Fred. Again, thank you, Suzanne and Fred, for joining us today. This webinar is recorded. So if you do want to refresh yourself on anything that was said, I will send that recording out so you can rewatch it. Also, you can take notice in the chat that Fred and Suzanne shared with me those links that they talked about in their presentation. So you can check out whether or not you're eligible for transportation, as well as that distance to see how far you can get by walking, how far you can get by biking, which I think are pretty cool resources for when we do our Gen Green project. So Generation Green, as mentioned, it's all about youth taking action. Thank you again to Claire and Hania, who are youth stakeholders who really helped introduce the call and were fielding some of those questions with me. Our youth stakeholder team, we're working together to really sort of create a great program for you. And of course, our theme this year is active transportation. It's all about how our small everyday actions can have a huge impact overall. So what can we do collectively to drive a change in our community? This is what Gen Green's about. By each person doing our one project, we can make a large impact. What is the project? Well, the project is driven by you. It focuses on transportation, and you can see by the presentation tonight, and if you weren't able to attend our presentation last week, we talked a little about Canada and transportation projects going on around there, and a little bit more about why focusing on this topic is important. Again, that's recorded, and I'll share that with you so you can rewatch it. But we give you the skills that you need in order to take action. So we provide you with the tools. We have a calculation sheet for you and everything. So that way it makes it very easy for you to run with your idea. And your idea can be as simple as I'm going to measure myself driving for 2 months. And then for 2 months, I'm going to walk. And what is the difference between that? So you're really looking about how does your action change. That was simple, or it could be more complicated. What does it actually do, and how much change can we put in a small amount of time? On each person doing their own bit, we can make big impacts, which I'll show in just a slide when I flip through. So what do you get by joining Gen Green? You get 20 community involvement hours. So if you're interested in being a part, again, I'll flash it up in a second. You can submit your project idea. That's your intention that you want to be part of the project. You get your 20 community involvement hours by completing your project. And again, I'll talk a little bit more in details, and I'm going to share a video that you can watch. So it kind of explains the whole process as well. What you also get is you get to make a big impact. I don't know why that took me so hard to get that out. And you get to be a part of reducing GHG emissions in our community. So you're joining Gen Green, you're joining this initiative, you're joining youth from around Canada, around the world, who are taking action to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions or take climate action. So you get to be a part of all of that as well. And it's very exciting. If that's something you're passionate about, this can be your way in to learn, to talk about it, to share what you've done with others, and hopefully inspire others to take action too. Also, you get to be recognized. You're recognized by us. You're recognized by all of the partners of the Halton Climate Collective. And there's potential to win prizes in the new year when we have our in-person event in April, our project showcase for most impact, most creative, most innovative. So you get all of this stuff by joining Gen Green. And step one is just submitting your idea, thinking about transportation, choosing an activity that sort of relates to you. Attending webinars like this gives you your inspiration. The project proposal form is open now. You can find the link for it at our website, climatecollective.ch/gengreen 2022. So you can start submitting your idea. The deadline for that is February 7th. So you have over Christmas break to think about, to learn about transportation, to rewatch these webinars, and really find something that really inspires you. So like I said, we're sort of right in the very beginning parts. It's okay if you not sure how to calculate. It's okay if your project idea changes after you come back. Submit your idea. You have until February 7th so that I know that you're interested in joining on this journey with us and with all of your peers as well. So again, we have already made a big impact being part of Gen Green. In 2020, we reduced 20.3 tons of GHG or carbon dioxide equivalents. In 2021, it was 23.8. And what can we do in 2022 is the big question. And I think we can do a lot if each of us do a big project like this. And you guys, all of our minds working together, I think we can make an even bigger impact this year. So like I mentioned, you can scan this QR code here. This will lead you to our project proposal form. If the QR code is not working, I'll make sure to send the link to you so you can start submitting your idea. Again, if your idea changes or it sort of morphs, that's part of the process as well. You have until February 7th in order to get your idea in. And please come out to these webinars and watch them and engage, because this will help you brainstorm and come up with ideas so you can enact your project. If you ever have any questions, and I see that there's some things in the Q&A, which I will address in a second, you can always email me, or you can connect with me on social media as well. And that is our website there, which I'll throw all these links in the chat. And I will also email, so I'll stay in touch with you guys as well. Let me just. Yeah, I actually, thank you, Michelle, for pointing that out. I thought I fixed that, but apparently Google Forms did not fix that for me. I will get that solved and I will send it to you. I'm putting the link in the chat right now for all of you. Again, if you want to screenshot and or hold your phone up, or even just quickly screen grab this link here, this links you directly to the form. If you see something that says no longer accepting responses, that is not true. We are accepting responses. Seems to work for some people and not for others. I've gotten a couple of responses in. I'll figure that out and I will send that link again for you. We are accepting responses up until February 7th. And then after that, you'll just be doing your project. Again, thank you all for attending today. Thank you to Suzanne and Fred. Thank you to Claire and Hania. It's very exciting to get into this topic. Kind of briefly, we mentioned at the beginning, transportation is one of the biggest contributors to GHG emissions. So I think we can really push the needle ahead by really focusing on this topic. Just like Suzanne mentioned, it's very exciting. And there's so much that we can do as a community. Amazing. And we are reaching the end of our time. So if you do have to leave, then I invite you to head off. I will send this recording out. But if you have a couple moments to stay, I'll just answer a couple of the questions that are popping in too.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Cool. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly answer the questions that I see in here in the Q&A if you're able to stay. Yes, you can do this project as a group project. We just ask that you do it a max of 5 people per group. When you start to get really, really big, it starts to get a little complicated for you. So you don't have to do it individually. You could, if you have a sibling you want to pair up with, you have a friend you want to work on a project together, groups of 2 are great. Again, you can do up to a group of 5 people. And all of this information, these PowerPoints, the presentations from Suzanne and Fred, the recordings, and all those resources I mentioned is all going to get sent to you. The only thing you need to do is come out to these webinars to learn more and then submit your idea into our proposal form, which I will again email it to you, so make sure that you have everything you need in order to go on this journey with me. There'll be many more of these coming out. So yeah, I'm excited. This is kind of the tail end of 2021, but 2022 we'll be doing way more stuff. So yeah, if you have any more questions, you can also email me. I'm just going to throw it in the chat. It's Katrine@haltonenvironment.ca. And yeah, I'm happy to connect with you even on a one-on-one basis if you just want to power through all your questions, or just email it to me and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So I'll let you guys all go now. Again, I will send this recording, the link and everything to you so you have it in email. I know that the only way I remember things is if it comes to me through email, so I think you hopefully it's the same. And yeah, have a good night. Bye everyone.